Hi, and welcome to Author Conversations. As usual, I'm Chris Dabbs, and you know what? I've got a question for you. Can you remember what life was like before smartphones, social media, and constant notifications? I could just about do that myself, I've got to say, but I can do it a lot, right? But I was just trying to say just about. But anyhow, yeah, I do remember life like that. And man, it's interesting seeing the world today. And my guest today is storyteller, singer-songwriter, and humorist Tom Potosnak, who's author of Subject to Change. Now, Subject to Change is part memoir, part collection of stories and songs, and the book reflects on growing up in a very different world while exploring experiences that remain universal even now. So, Tom, welcome to Author Conversations. I mean, I could go on for ages about how bad it was in the olden days without phones and things, but I guess you don't agree with that. So what inspired you to write Subject to Change, and how come you describe it as, I thought this was quite funny, sort of a biography?
Well, first of all, yeah, I remember obviously those days. I grew up in those days, and they weren't all bad. I mean, it was okay. In fact, in many ways, it was very good. But what really inspired me to write this was I've been a storyteller for many, many years, singer, songwriter. I've done many shows, and I tend to lean towards trying to find kind of the bigger picture in regards to whatever topic it is that I'm singing about or talking about. And having grown up in those days and seeing the kind of the analog era, if you ever were, and now we're the digital age, and seeing all of their differences, when I would write some of my songs or tell some of my stories, it would seem as if those were the sorts of things I would gravitate to. Geez, from a little different then, and this was how they were different. This is the way they are now. It doesn't necessarily make them bad, but there is certainly a difference. And I wanted to communicate that because that's kind of what I've done over the years with my stories and songs and shows.
So you're saying that but the world was different, right? And I think the way that you've written your book's different as well, because you've built it around your story, songs and shows, and your musings and things. So how come you chose to do that format instead of writing like a traditional memoir? Because obviously most people just go on about, oh yeah, I remember when I was 14, I couldn't do this, I couldn't do that, but now they can, But I think you've chosen quite an interesting way to do it.
Well, first of all, when I call this book a sort of biography, what I mean is it's not my life story. That would be boring. I've invented nothing, haven't solved any international crisis, I haven't won any Super Bowls.
Oh, come on, Tom, crack on. Honestly.
For anyone to be interested in Tom Potosnak's story, doesn't work. To me, that would be a traditional memoir, I think. What a sort of biography is, it is stories from my life, about life, as opposed to the story of my life. And I've been, as I said earlier, a storyteller, musician, and I do these one-man shows that we're doing for the last 16, 17 years, where what I did was, it was kind of funny, actually. I remember telling my daughter and my wife this, I'm going to write a one-man show, and it's going to be part humor, part songs, stories. And they said, yeah, sure you are. And I used to take the dog for a walk in the morning, and I would up a stuck, and I hold and I write it out or type it out. And lo and behold, I put together a show called Midlife Chronicles, because I was a midlifer. And it went pretty well. People enjoyed it. They enjoyed the stories. They enjoyed the songs. Since then, I put together 3 different one-man shows that and variations on the theme over the years. And I do it when I can, because I was running a business for a lot of years, so I had to weave it in between life and work and what have you. But as I say, people enjoyed them. And what they would say to me is, well, why don't you turn this into like a book or something? Because you can only do so many songs and so many stories in a 90-minute show. So I said, that would be a good thing to try to do, to be able to expand it and add more stories, more songs. But I wanted to make it a theme as opposed to just a collection of stories and songs that are one-offs. So I made it into, yes, it's a memoir, but it also has sort of a theme that runs through it about kind of the search for meaning in life and significance and those sorts of things. So the reason I did it that way was because that's the way I've done it over the years with the audience or on stage. It just lent itself to that. There is also a very unique way to do it. People said, wow, this is kind of cool. You got songs in it, you got stories in it. So it's worked out.
No, right, okay, that's an interesting way to look at it. Isn't it? I mean, I love the way Take the Dog Out, and then you're writing at the same time, right? So multitasking. But I mean, so what is the theme then that sort of like puts the connection through to people of a certain age, as we would say over here, who are readers and the audience of the book? What theme connects them, do you think?
Well, when the book starts out, I talk about a senior year in high school. First day, go in, and this literature teacher, who I did not know, comes in, shuffles in, and says, "What does it all mean?" And he plops down in the chair. And he did this every day for a few days, and finally some kid from back from class yelled out, "Is that question going to be on a test?" And he stopped saying, "What does it all mean?" But we all kind of figured out that, obviously we'd had any answers to this guy. And we figured, well, he's probably in the middle of his, midlife crisis somewhere, and he's either going to get it together or, hop on a Harley and get a leather jacket and ride off into the Jersey sunset with a similarly frustrated cafeteria lady. But he didn't. He made it. But my point is that, for some reason, that question always kind of stuck with me. What does it all mean? And then when I was in the Army, I was 4 days into the Army, my first day reporting for duty. They had nothing for me to do. My course didn't start for 6 weeks. They say, hey, go to your bachelor officer quarters, come back Monday. So, okay, I'm walking down the street, a big Class A uniform, feeling all spiffy. And all of a sudden, this green sedan screeches to a halt. Guy jumps out, runs screaming towards me. "Lieutenant, do you know who's in that vehicle?" I'm like, well, no. I mean, I know who was in the vehicle, Captain Orr, because his name was tagged right in front of me. He said, "That's the commanding general of Fort Benjamin Harrison. You're to render proper military courtesy in the form of a salute when the general's vehicle passes by." Well, I must have missed that class wearing ROTC because I didn't know what I was doing. And he sent me on my way, and I, honest to God, the rest of the way to my quarters, I must have saluted every green vehicle I saw just to take no chances. I'm sure there were a lot of, privates and sergeants running around going, "Hey, look at the goofy lieutenant saluting me," But anyway, I know it's a long story, but it kind of sets up how this book sort of came to be. I get into my quarters there, and I clop my stuff down, and I sit down, honest to God, and I said, "What does it all mean? Basically, what have I got myself into?" And I laughed, and I thought of my old teacher. The next day, I snuck off to the rec center, borrowed a guitar from the rec center, made sure keep an eye out for Captain or River Protector of the general's vehicle, made it back and wrote the lyrics, and I wrote this song of The Search Could All. So that kind of got things going. And the theme of the book, it starts out with what does it all mean? And as I went through the book and the stories, there are some that are just plain funny. But there are others that have a larger meaning, and it's about personal connection. It's about in relationships. It's my uncles who made me feel like I was somebody special growing up in a generation where parents certainly were friends. And it's about friendships. These stories all seem to have that theme that runs through them. And as I roll through all this, I get towards the end of the book and I ask again, well, what does it all mean? And basically, there were clues as you go along through the book. It's about personal relationships, fulfilling relationships, loving relationships. It's about connection. I think that connection was a lot easier to have in the pre-digital age. And that's part of when I talk about this book being for those who grew up without cell phone. I think those people can understand that and recognize that that's something that's kind of lacking in our culture today because of it. So I hope that answers it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, without getting all sort of like political and all that sort of jazz, I mean, I think that the social media thing and digital communications and things has changed the world like completely. I mean, don't get me wrong, I use internet for business and what have you. But I'm from the UK and we're following Australia, who has banned social media for under 16-year-olds. Yeah. So we've recently announced that. And there's uproar, absolute uproar from the youngsters, as you can imagine, because they think they're going to be missing out on something, and of course, they will, right? Because they've grown up, as you say, where parents are friends and they're helping them to use their devices to do whatever it is that they want, right? So no, yeah, I can see what you're saying, and I could definitely see that the audience would be on board with what you're saying as well. Yeah, I think unless you have gone through this, you just don't realize, do you? You know what it was like before, and it wasn't bad. That's the point to make, isn't it? Right? My wife and I were talking about this yesterday. Actually, you know, we got on with stuff, right? I'm not saying they don't, but you know what I mean? It's different. So talking of getting on with stuff as well, right? You mentioned that you had to make sure that Captain Orr didn't catch you, of course, but you got yourself a guitar from the rec center, which is great, right? Because is that when you started playing? Because, you know, you've woven music quite interestingly through your book, right? Through all those QR codes that are in there. So I love the idea of that and your song lyrics. So how did you decide which stories kind of deserved a song, or did it work the other way around?
Well, when I first wrote this, it ended up being 40 chapters, right? Sounds like 40 chapters makes for a long book, but they're not very short, which, by the way, is a quick thing, because I also think with a limited attention span, the treatment seemed to have, the stories being short, or what age and songs seems to work, people seem to appreciate it. But I started out with 53 chapters, and I, had 13 more that I ended on it. So I had to edit because I wanted to stay tight with the theme. And again, the stories that either had some humor in them, that they weren't all heavy stories, but they were funny. And then there were other stories that had a little bit of depth to them. But I didn't want to be redundant because I realized I've got a couple of songs here, for instance, about my college years. A song that, when I went off to school, I was from New Jersey and I ended up in Pennsylvania. And it was a very different sort of world. I was in a small farm town in Cumberland Valley of Pennsylvania. And it was beautiful. So I had written a few songs around that. But then I had another song about the steel mills in Allentown, Pennsylvania. And guys I went to school, whose fathers were laid off and they had to be in school. But, I didn't want to go to the well one too many times with the college years Pennsylvania stories. So I said, well, I've got to come back. So I wanted to keep it, I didn't want to start wandering off into the wilderness with this thing. So I really just went through and set up which songs are essential, which stories are essential, and also what songs do I really like that I think people will enjoy. So there's a combination of things.
I don't know. Yeah, great. Well, again, yeah, that makes sense. I think a lot of us, we write books or whatever, and you end up with a tone, Hang on a sec. Sorry about that. Just a bit of a technical thing there. No, it's all good. Don't worry. Yeah, people end up with massive tomes, don't they? With hundreds of pages, and then the editing is a nightmare. But yeah, I think that looking down at it and making sure that you've got exactly what you want in the book makes sense, right? So, I mean, humor, for instance, is something that runs throughout the book. And I could see, obviously, you're a humorous guy, and that's why you're a humorist. But why do you think that laughter is, I guess, one of the ways to talk about, aging and life changes and how things change all the time?
Well, I first of all, I there's two things I say that I enjoy very much in life. One is to laugh. I love to laugh. And two, I enjoy making people laugh. And humor it's the left turn. It's the thing you don't see coming. And when they call it a sense of humor, that's what it is. It's up, it hits you and it's funny and you enjoy it. And that's a great feel. So I've always enjoyed humor. I come from a family of people who are fairly witty, especially my uncle and my mom as well. They just would come out with things. You'd say something, and bam, it would hit you. And it made you laugh, but oftentimes there was a point there. And it's oftentimes easier to receive something when it comes in a funny way or in a humorous way, in a lighthearted way. And I think that in this book, when I talk about growing up, and, there were we all have our struggles or challenges as we grow up. And in the book, I talk a lot about the way my parents were. My parents were tough. I tell a story about when I was a kid in the second grade or whatever. I used to cry when I get to school sometimes. And I make the joke, Now, nowadays it calls separation anxiety. Back then we called it being a baby. And they used to send me to the nurse so I could get it together. One day I go to the nurse and they say, Tommy, go to principal's office. And I go there. Who's there? My mother. And my mother worked. She rare back in those days that she had 2 early parents. And my mother said to the principal, she said, hey, could you talk to Tommy? He was crying in school. Let's see what's up. So she said, can I have a word alone with him? He says, sure. And she sits me down, looks me in the eye and says, Tommy, I don't know what you're crying about, but you got to cut it out. Because if you don't, and they make me leave work one more time, I'm going to get fired. If I get fired, we're not going to have any money. And if we don't have any money, we're going to starve. I haven't cried since. And that's the story I tell in the show. And the point is, there have been people that have said, oh, your mom was tough on you, or just other stories in the book that I tell. And I said, well, yes, but no. And I kind of tell it with a bit of humor because it's kind of softens the edges a little bit. And it makes it more palatable and more fun. And you can make the fully, I think, very effective even.
But and also, at the end of the day, it's the truth, right? So, your mum's being blunt with you, but equally, I mean, well, this is it. Okay, so looking back at that and looking at now, what do you think the biggest difference is between growing up before the internet and growing up today for these people? Oh, these people, you know what I mean? People.
I think it's personal connection. It's, when I was growing up, if you had a problem with someone, you talked to them. You were face to face. You did whatever it was you were going to do. You didn't sit down in your basement with 2 angry little phones and start, putting something on, Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or X, as it is now called, which we're always reminded of. But it was only one way. You dealt with people once more. You had personal relationships. And that was just the way it was. And the biggest change is now we have so many more opportunities to sit back, take pot shots, do whatever it is we feel like doing without ever having to face it. In fact, in the book, I make mention of this. I saw a meme that I thought was great. And I use this in the show, and I can get a kick out of it. I say that, as that great American philosopher Mike Tyson then said, the problem with the internet, I'll paraphrase it, is that, people get away with saying things about you without getting punched in the face for it, a little bit blunt, but, that's kind of the difference is the separation. I went out to dinner now, and honest to goodness, me and my wife were sitting there and I pointed to a couple of tables, family of 5, parents, 3 kids, every one of them on their phones. They weren't talking, they weren't interacting whatsoever. They were all doing whatever it is they were doing, their own thing. Now, first of all, as a kid, we didn't go out for dinner very much. That's a big difference too. But
That's
when
true.
we did, we put on decent clothes and we interacted, So that was a difference. Now, it's necessarily say how it's better, this is worse, or whatever. It's different, but you really do have to watch, I think, and be vigilant that to not fall into this, you're into yourself. Selfie-obsessed culture had ball. Couldn't do it then. It was just, you couldn't.
Well, no, exactly. It's funny because when I was growing up, I always used to say, like, if I went to, when I say growing up, when I was a bit older, say in my 20s or whatever, if I was in a restaurant and I saw like an older couple who was sat there at their table, not talking to each other, for instance, I would think that was very sad and things like that. Whereas now it's changed. My age, I agree with you. I look over and I see like no one talking to each other and they're just doing this. And then when I pick up my phone to kind of do the same thing, I'm thinking, I've got to stop it. But then I can't sit there with my wife not talking, right? So it is a bit of a minefield. But this is the whole point though, isn't it? Encounters with everyday people is what we're talking about. So being able to talk to your wife, being able to go to the store and talk to somebody in the store, being able to walk down the street with your dog and interact with people who you might come across, right? So many of your stories, they're focusing on these kind of encounters, right? So what attracts you to those kind of like normal situations, I guess?
That's my nature, I think. And I've always been, I had a lot of, I had two brothers, but I had a good number of aunts and uncles. And in fact, I was the 28th or 31 first cousins. About one had 10 years, one had 5, one had, and my mother's side of the family, accurately 4. But we spent a lot of time with those people. And me being on the younger end, I was always fascinated by these people. They were like my heroes, and my uncle Charlie would tell these stories about this, about that, and, my cousin this or that. And I always just gravitated towards kind of the what does it all mean thing. Wow, that story Uncle Charlie was talking about, or, here's a guy that was, he grew up working in coal mines, and he came to New York City and became a bus driver, and just, I was always fascinated with. So ordinary people, ordinary things, ordinary stories, it's a gold mine. It's just, there's so much there. And we're so interested in what's out there that we ignore what's right here. And that's the stuff that's most important, because these are the people that you interact with. These are the people you come from. So I was very fortunate, I think, in that regard, to have all these people and to be in the observer age, because when you're the young one, they don't want to hear from, and I get it. What do I have to say that's so valuable? I was very much there for a laugh, but I always just enjoyed the interaction. People, she was just great.
Yeah. I'm always jealous, actually, when I see that, I think in America it happens more often, where you have great family reunions, right? Or family meetups every year or something, like that. It's not something that we really do here, but I always think that big family is great, right? I'm very jealous when I hear that. So talking of interacting, then we're talking about interacting with family. We're talking about interacting with people in different age brackets as well, as you said. Who wants to hear from the young one, right? But so what do you hope that younger readers, or that somebody can tell a younger person, what about them learning from the experiences that you share? What do you hope that they learn from that?
Well, in the book, what I hope, and this is, I'm very thankful in this way. When I'll do my shows, my daughter is 33. Notice I had to think for a second. Okay, she's 73. And her generation of friends, they grew up in the kind of the beginning, because the iPhone didn't come out till 07. She was born in 92. So really, she kind of made it cool without the heavy influence of it and stuff. But she will have people that she invites to these shows that enjoy the shows, enjoy the skits. I think they enjoy the differences, and they find it kind of funny. But they also, it makes them think, well, people have said to me many times, I enjoy your show because it makes me laugh, but it also makes me think. And there's some poignant stuff in there. And I also do address what phenomenon, the differences. I have a song called Say Hey, which is about the way things are now, touching on cancel culture in a lighthearted sort of way, but it kind of makes a point. I also talk about, in the chapter, do something, do something, meaning be a positive influence. I say, everyone's so focused on changing the world, to being an influencer, doing something so grand. Well, something, you could sit down in a cafe and have yourself a cup of coffee and bury yourself in your phone. Or you could look up once in a while. Perhaps you spot an old friend. Maybe you could smile at somebody, and that just, was what they needed with that moment. So these kind of little bit of lessons, a little bit of things, I don't beat them over the head with it. But I like to think that some people do walk away with, he's right. Maybe a little less on the me and a little more on the us is a good thing. And again, it's not going to change the world. But again, the smile alone, it might just change somebody's day.
And make you feel better as well, right?
Absolutely. What you do for others, you do for yourself. I mean, that's the truth.
Yeah, true. And I think that's the thing. So, okay, the title of the book is Subject to Change, right? That seems to carry a lot of meaning, because it's quite sort of ambiguous, isn't it, really? But what does that phrase represent in your life and in the book then?
Well, okay, my father, my parents used to rent a place when they retired down in New Jersey Shore, a little bungalow, a few blocks onto the beach. And I was down visiting. My father was living with prostate cancer, 26 years, and he seemed to be doing okay. It's a summer eek. we're sitting out on the course, just he and I. He wasn't a guy to talk about feelings and things, all that gyration in Hebrew. It wasn't his thing. But just out of the blue, he said to me, Tommy, I know I'm not going to live forever, but I do plan on hanging around in Denver. In the meantime, I'm going to enjoy the time I had with other boys and kids. And then he paused and he looked up. I get chills just telling it. He said, but this isn't all there is. And I didn't say anything. 6 months later, he was done. And after his funeral and going down to visit my mother in my hometown a few times, I took a ride around. I went by my schoolyard. I went by the places that meant something to me growing up. And I realized, how much it changed. And the opening line of that song, if these times I rely on the street sides when I find myself around, the things I always remembered, faces and places I always remembered anymore are not run so clear. And I kind of take it from the schoolyard memories, and they're all subject to change. And I take it to the family, to the backyard, family memories, and I say, well, they're all subject to change. Then I go into getting older and how things are. But the thing throughout the song and the chorus is basically that some things don't change. Your old dear friends, true love, hope and faith, and some other side. Those are the rocks you cling to when the times get tough, when the storms are raging. There are things that you hold on to. But things for certain if nothing stays the same. So you walk these core things into life. And that's the thing I feel tough about. The people don't have that foundation maybe that they used to. So the subject to change thing, to kind of wrap that up. Yeah, it was about going back to my hometown, seeing how things had changed, and just thinking about that on a larger scale. But then also coming back to, okay, what remains? And that's improved. In the last line of the song, old friends, true love, hope and faith always remain, never to change. So
well, that's very wise, Tom. It's very wise. I'm going to say, everything is subject to change. You're quite right, right? And as long as we... Oh, hold on a second again. Sorry.
Sorry.
Don't worry, that's okay. Always, this is the whole point, isn't it? I think once you realize and accept that things do change, then, you can actually get on with your own life, can't you? So, Tom, we're running out of time, unfortunately, which is a real problem here. But it's such a shame because it sounds great, and your life stories sounds fantastic from what you've said so far as well. And the book sounds great too. I can't wait to listen to more of the music. But what really gets me is when readers listen and read your book as well. What sort of feedback have you had from people? Obviously, I guess if they're feeding back to you, they like it, right? But what is it that they're looking at?
A couple things. One, the humor. Two, the poignancy. I have a story in there about my uncle who died in World War II. My other uncle who didn't die in World War II, but as he passed for the rest of his life. It's a very poignant, sad story that carries a lot of meaning. So there's heavy stuff, there's lighthearted stuff. People like the fact that have QR codes on the book where you scan it, listen to the song, and read the lyrics below, especially if they're not familiar with the song. Even if they are, they've said, geez, I've heard the song, but now read the lyrics help. The audiobook people really enjoy because it's me telling the stories in person, almost as if on stage. So people enjoy the humor, they enjoy the big picture meaning. And which is, to me, a home run. That's what I was hoping for. It's been nice.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, well, that's great. And my final question is really, what do you hope that people get out of this book? What's the takeaway, I guess, for readers?
Takeaway, kind of have in the last chapter. Again, it's a meaningful and fulfilling and enriching life is based on meaningful, fulfilling, and enriching relationships of love, service, and, to love is to act. Harry Chapin, my songwriting hero, would say, when in doubt, do something. So take your gifts, take the best of who you are, never let it slip away, and share it with others. Because that's all you got in this life, really. All the other stuff, the likes on Facebook, the money in your pocket, all go away. But that little moment you spend with people that's meaningful, that to me is stuff of life. And that's what I hope people get from it.
So pass yourself around, pay it forward, all that sort of stuff, right? So, actually make sure that you make a difference as well. Don't keep it all to yourself. Well, that's another wise point there, Tom. Yeah, brilliant. Well, listen, My thanks to you, Tom Potosnak, for coming to talk to me today. You're the author of Subject to Change, as we know, and I guess we could buy the book, an audiobook, through Amazon and stuff?
Yes, you can on my website, tompotosnak.com.
Brilliant. Okay. Yeah, I bet there is. Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, listen, everyone. Thank you very much for listening and or watching. Make sure to leave a comment down below so that Tom can, sort of answer any questions that you've got, and so that we can get a conversation started about this. But if you've enjoyed this conversation, then please subscribe, leave a review, and share the episode with fellow readers and writers and old folks like me. I'm not saying anything about you, Tom, but old folks like me.
I think I'm a little older than you.
Oh, well, until next time, thanks for listening to Author Conversations. I've been Chris Dabbs, and Tom Potosnak, thank you once again for meeting up with me, and it's been fantastic talking to you. If you enjoyed this conversation, you can watch more Author Conversations here.